All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick on the Power. So in this video, I want to talk about professional wrestlers that also competed in bodybuilding. Now, there have been many crossovers between bodybuilding and professional wrestling, but there have been very few crossovers where that competitor actually ended up competing in the Mr. Olympia competition, the highest title that you can win as a professional bodybuilder. So to start off this video in the number 3 spot, I want to start out with the earliest bodybuilder that competed at the Olympia and was also a professional wrestler, and that would be Earl Maynard. So Earl Maynard competed in the very first Mr. Olympia ever back in 1965, taking 3rd place behind Larry Scott, who won the show, and Harold Poole, who took 2nd. He would also compete in the 1966 Mr. Olympia, taking 3rd again that year, and yet again behind Larry Scott and Harold Poole. Now, that same year in 1965, Earl Maynard would also become the IFBB Mr. Universe winner. In the year prior to that, in 1964, he won the NABA Pro Mr. Universe. So he had 2 Mr. Universe titles. He was a Masters Mr. America winner. He's also Mr. Europe and Mr. England prior to that first Mr. Olympia appearance. So he was a very accomplished bodybuilder and a very historic bodybuilder, really. One of the few guys that competed in the first 2 Olympias ever. Now, one of the fascinating things about Earl Maynard is, unlike most bodybuilders are bodybuilders before they become pro wrestlers. And because of their great physiques, they end up going on to be pro wrestlers because wrestling has become heavily physique-based on having a big muscular guy as a successful pro wrestler. But Earl Maynard actually started pro wrestling in 1960, and he would actually compete as a pro wrestler and a pro bodybuilder at the same time. So at the same time he was competing in the Mr. Olympias, the Mr. Universe competitions, he was also wrestling for PNW, or Pacific Northwest Wrestling, and also Stampede Wrestling up in Canada, which is this is going to be one of the wrestling federations that other guys on this list also competed in. Now, even more fascinating about Earl Maynard is during his time with NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, he was a tag team champion. So his tag team partner was actually Rocky Johnson, and that was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's father. So not only does Earl Maynard have a lot of history in the bodybuilding community, but he's very, historic in the wrestling community, wrestling with one of the greatest wrestlers of all time's dad, Rocky Johnson. Now, coming in the number 2 spot on this list, we have a bodybuilder that was actually very successful during his Olympia run in the late 70s and early 80s, and that is a bodybuilder by the name of Roy Calendar. Now, Roy Calendar actually had a very impressive physique for that era of the 1970s. This guy was shredded to the bone, and he had a level of size that was it was really unreal for that period of time. So he would begin his Olympia run in 1978, placing 3rd at the 1978 Olympia overall and 2nd in the heavyweight division at the IFBB Olympia. In 1979, he would go to the Olympia again and place 4th in the heavyweight division. So keep in mind, this was during the time which lasted from 1974 to 1979, I believe, where they had the over and under 200 categories at the Olympia. So that would be the lightweight and the heavyweight categories, which they discontinued right before 1980 when Arnold made his comeback. So during this time, these placings, when I say he placed 4th place in the heavyweight division, that was not 4th place overall at the Olympia. So 4th place in the heavyweights in 79, and that would be the final year of the over-under. So in 1980, that controversial Olympia with Arnold Schwarzenegger making his comeback and winning that show, you had Mike Mentzer controversially placing. You would have Roy Calendar taking 7th place, which was a very respectable finish at a very competitive lineup at that 1980 Mr. Olympia. In 1981, he would place 4th overall at the Mr. Olympia. And his final Olympia appearance will be in 1984, taking that 5th place spot, retiring from the IFBB after 1987. Now, prior to his Olympia run in the late 70s, he also won quite a few bodybuilding titles before he entered the IFBB, including the Mr. United Kingdom, the Mr. Universe, the Mr. Canada, and the Mr. International. So this guy was a serious bodybuilder, one of the top guys, one of the best pros from the 80s and 70s, really. And this was another guy that would pursue professional wrestling in the same organization as Earl Maynard, Stampede Wrestling up in Canada. Although his career wouldn't last nearly as long as Earl Maynard's did, he would start wrestling in 1974, and he would quit wrestling in 1976. So right before he made his run at the Mr. Olympia title, that would be when he retired from pro wrestling, assumingly to focus specifically on the Mr. Olympia. So Roy Calendar is that number 2 spot. Now, coming in the number one spot, we have the most recent guy to appear as a pro wrestler and also appear on the Olympia stage. So that's kind of how I ordered these numbers, is by oldest to most recent. And that would be Achim Albrecht, but you might know him better as his ring name, Brachus. Now, unlike the other two guys on this list, Brachus or Achim Albrecht would compete in two of the largest professional wrestling promotions, really towards the peak of their popularity, and that would be WWF and, of course, ECW. As well as USWA, but WWF obviously being the most well-known professional wrestling organization, where Achim wrestled from 1996 to 1997, so really during that Attitude Era. And this is kind of a continuation of the legacy set by Earl Maynard, who wrestled with Rocky Johnson, because Achim Albrecht was actually trained in part by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So Achim Albrecht would appear in the 1991 Mr. Olympia, and he was a very promising bodybuilder when he made that appearance, placing 9th. And then the following year at the 1992 Arnold Classic, he would move up to 4th place at that show. But then in mid-1992, he would tear his bicep, preventing him from really taking his physique to where he wanted it to be as a pro bodybuilder. Arguably, he had a lot of potential in the IFBB prior to that bicep tear, but it would be at that point when he realized that there was really no redeeming for his physique after tearing that bicep that he would start to pursue professional wrestling. He would make one final run at the Olympia title in 1994, placing 17th, and his final competition would be the 1996 Night of Champions, where he placed 10th, after which he decided to pursue his career with the WWF. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up if you did enjoy it. If there's anyone else that you can think of that you could add to this list, please go ahead and comment that in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.